One of the things that we're really going to be talking about a lot as we go into I don't know if you guys know, we're actually on a fiscal year as a church, which means that July 1st starts a brand new year for us as a congregation. Starts a brand new strategic plan, starts a brand new 12-month cycle of what we do. And one of the big areas that we know that we're going to be focusing on in this coming year is multiplication. Specifically, multiplying more leaders who can disciple more people. That's really what we're going to be focused on. And so, given that we are here at small group training, we actually wanted to spend some time, really the rest of our time tonight, talking about the who and the how of leadership multiplication. One of the things that we always talk about is we would love to see more groups reaching more people. We'd love to see more people being discipled in faith. But in order for that to happen, the other side of the spiritual engagement journey matters as well. And that's that there are multiplying leaders who are discipling other people. And many of you who are joining us for small group training lead groups. You guys lead small groups of your own. But one of the things that I've often heard and that our coaches have heard as they've been working with our leaders is people saying, well, but I don't know who's going to step into leadership. I don't know how to multiply my group. And oftentimes, the story we hear about groups attempting to multiply goes a little something like this. A leader says, I think our group is big enough. I think we should multiply. So they get together with their group one time and they say, hey, we're really big. I think we should multiply. Who wants to lead? And the small group is just like this room. There's no reaction. They just sit there in silence. Some of them kind of and then they look down, and then the leader's well, I guess we're not multiplying. And then that's what happens. That's how bad leadership multiplication happens, is they don't multiply at all, or somebody reluctantly goes, me, I guess, I don't know. And they kind of go and meet as a side group for a couple of weeks, and then they get back together with their previous group, and they're just I'm sorry we broke up. Can we start seeing each other again? And it's really awkward, but no group multiplication happens. And so the constant challenge is, how do we actually multiply groups? Well, you have to start by multiplying leaders. Leaders don't just happen. Leaders are grown. They're developed. Now, if you've been to some of our trainings before, what I'm about to teach is going to be a little bit of a refresh, but it's a good one. In the sense that it's something we have to be thinking about all the time. So for some of you, this is going to be new. For some of you, this is going to be review. And if it's something that you've seen before, I really want you then to press into more the application side of it, not the knowledge acquisition side of it. To start to really be self-reflective and say, where am I at in this journey? But I think we want to start by looking at how Jesus did it. That's usually a good place to begin when it comes to our faith. Is how did Jesus identify and multiply leaders? And so to help us really wrap our heads around this, I want to go to perhaps one of my favorite places in the whole Bible, is Mark chapter 3. It's Mark chapter 3 where Jesus first calls the 12. And here's what I love about Mark chapter 3. There are some details in Mark chapter 3 that you don't find in any of the other Gospels. The other Gospels have a calling of the 12. Matthew has a calling of the 12. Luke has a calling of the 12, where Jesus gets up and he calls 12, and they all kind of come to him. But Mark's calling of the 12 is different. There are a few things that Mark says that none of the other gospel writers capture. And I want to kind of call those out. So let's take a look at Mark chapter 3. This is what we read. It says, Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. And these are the 12 that he appointed. And it goes on to list those 12. Again, that stuff, the list of the 12, that's in Matthew and that's in Luke. But there are two things that Mark says that the other two gospel writers don't include. The first that it says, Jesus called him those he wanted. The other gospels simply say Jesus called the 12, and then just list their names. But Mark gives us this little detail into Jesus' inner motivations. He actually says Jesus called them those he wanted. These were people that he wanted to spend time with. And then he says, and they came to him and he appointed 12. And again, a little detail that Mark includes that no other gospel writer includes. It says that they might be with him and he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. The other gospel writer says that he appointed them to have authority that they could go out and do this. But only Mark says that they might be with him and spend time with him. Again, a little glimpse into Jesus' inner motivations. And this is what I always found was so interesting. I think it's actually in Matthew's gospel. Matthew's gospel, if you were to just read the account of him calling the 12, he calls the 12 and he immediately sends them out. It's like they come to him and he's just like, hey, you 12, you're going to go preach, cast out demons, and heal, and preach about the kingdom. And I remember, like, especially as a new believer, when I read that, I was like, that's crazy. I mean, if Jesus did that to me, I would freak out and be like, heck no, I'm not doing that. And likewise, in Luke's gospel, he calls the 12, and then it just, like, changes stories. They go off to do something else. It's just like, well, what was the point of that? But Mark, what I love about Mark is Mark says he called them with a purpose, but it starts with them spending time with him. Mark is the only gospel writer to basically say before Jesus ever asked them to do anything for him, he simply asked them to be with him. And what's really wild is that you get to Mark chapter 6, and it's not till Mark chapter 6 that he actually sends them out. It says that Jesus went around teaching from village to village and calling the 12 to him. So it's a second calling of the 12. He began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits, and then they go. And what's so interesting, if you were to flip through your Bibles and see what's happening between chapter 3 and chapter 6, what you find is that between chapter 3 and chapter 6, Jesus experiences rejection by his family and the teachers of the law. Jesus preaches about the kingdom. Jesus calms the storm. Jesus casts out demons. Jesus heals someone who's sick and raises the dead. And then in chapter 6, he says, now you guys go do it. But here's the thing. We laugh at that, but think about this. Before Jesus ever asked them to do this, he showed them how to do it. The reason that they were able to do it is because they spent time with him seeing how he did it. He didn't ask them to preach without first modeling what preaching the kingdom looked like and inviting them into discussion about it. He didn't send them to cast out demons without first showing them how that's done. He doesn't send them out to heal without first inviting them to experience what healing actually looked like. And when he says, hey, and by the way, you're going to go to some towns and they're going to reject you, he didn't tell them that before they saw he himself being rejected and how he handled it. Mark is the only gospel writer who actually helps us see that Jesus had a very, very intentional process for developing these guys before he ever sent them. It was a relational process. They spent time with him. He enjoyed being with them. But then he also modeled and taught them exactly what he wanted them to do. And so the question is, how can we go and do likewise? And that's really what we're going to be talking about the rest of the evening, is how do we go and do likewise? And in order to do likewise, we need to know 2 things. We need to first know who we're looking for, and then what we do with them to help them grow. When you think about what am I looking for in terms of a leader or a potential leader, what are the characteristics that we're looking for? And one of the things that I've continually found is that it's not typically the things that we think of. That typically when we think of somebody who would be a good leader, we tend to think of somebody who's theologically sharp, knows a lot about the Bible and about what we believe in our faith, our theology. We tend to look for people who are really charismatic, and attract people to them. People want to listen to them. That's kind of the traits, very outgoing type of people. One of the things that I find funny is that there was a group of people in Jesus' day who were theologically sharp and incredibly charismatic. Do you want to know who they were? They were the Pharisees. The Pharisees were theologically very astute, and people loved to listen to them. They were very charismatic. You don't get to be a huge group in power unless you are. But that's not who Jesus picked. He picked tax collectors, zealots, fishermen, dudes who I don't even know if they had jobs. Like, I don't know what Bartholomew was doing. Does anybody? Like, nobody knows what Bartholomew's job was. Right? So what do we look for? I think that there are actually, you guys love, you can tell I love ingredients. I do. I love ingredients. There's a couple of ingredients we're looking for. What we're looking for is we're actually looking for fast people. When we say fast, that is an acronym. We're looking for fast people. Now, there's a handout that you should find, 4 ingredients people are looking for. See, ingredients. Ingredients are great. You can make brownies with ingredients. Anybody like the brownies that we're eating tonight? They're too small. Just wanted you to know. But they're delicious. Love brownies. Fast people. People who are faithful, available, spiritual, or maybe we should say spirit-led, and teachable. Faithful, available, spiritual, and teachable. That's it. Let me break that down for you. When we talk about somebody who is faithful, we're talking about somebody who is reliable. You can count on them to do what they say they're going to do. That's it. When they say, yeah, I'll show up and help out, they show up and help out. When they say, yeah, I'll be there, they're actually there. There's people you can count on. Faithful. Pretty simple. Second thing you want to look for is they're available. They have the time and the space available to commit both to the role and to the time required for their own development within it. Let me say that again. They have time and space available both to do the job, but also to commit to their own growth within it. Because the reality is that as leaders, one of the things I think makes the best leaders is that they're constantly learning. They're always looking for ways to develop. And the best potential leaders are those who make that time to grow. They're not just like, yeah, I can do the job. They're willing to be developed in it. So you want somebody who's available. Third, spiritual or spirit-led. This is a person who walks with and obeys God. They don't need to know everything about the Bible. They do not have to have a degree in systematic theology. You might say Lutheran confessions, and they're like, what are those? They might not know what that stuff is, but what they do know is they know Jesus, they love him, they're reading his word, and they're seeking to grow in their relationship with him. They're discerning in prayer, and they're committed to being guided by the scriptures. They know that they have a lot to learn, but they love Jesus, they love his word, and they're seeking to grow in that relationship. Okay? They're prayerful. They don't need to be a theological genius, but they need to love Jesus and want to keep learning about him and what it means to walk with him. Last but not least, they're teachable. This person is eager and willing to learn more from others. They seek clarity, they ask questions, they're ready to receive constructive feedback, and they put it all into practice. They know they have a lot to learn, and they look for ways to grow. Now, here's the thing that's important to note about these 4 qualities. The first 3 you can teach. You can teach somebody how to be more faithful. You can say, hey, when you said you would be there and you weren't, like, that was really tough. I'd love for you to help you follow through on that. Accountability can help. Availability, especially potential leaders. This is probably one of the toughest ones for them because everybody sees them as a potential leader. So everybody's asking them to do stuff. But you can teach them how to develop boundaries and margin and actually create space to grow. Spirit-led, you can teach somebody to actually pray and to read their Bible. That can be taught. But here's the one thing that can't be taught. Teachable. You either are teachable or you aren't. And actually, this is something I've heard said in a variety of different ways. Like Pat Lencioni, who's this genius, leadership consultant, a New York Times bestselling author on leadership. He actually wrote a book in which he called The Ideal Team Player. And he said the ideal team player is humble, hungry, and smart. He says when we talk about hungry, it means that they're passionate that the organization that they're a part of would grow. They want to see it at all costs grow. They're smart in the sense that they're people smart. And he says, but they're humble. And he actually, at the end of his book, he says, the hungry and smart you can teach, humble, I don't know how that happens. I can't teach a person to become more humble. What he's talking about is actually, when he describes humility, he's talking teachability. Are they open to growing? So this is one of those things where you might have somebody who's faithful, available, spiritual, but they will never take criticism or advice. They think they know it all. Run as fast as you can away from that individual. They're not ready for leadership. If you're going to be in leadership, you have to be willing to say, I know that I have a lot to learn, and be willing to grow in it. But all four are needed for the best kinds of leaders. That's what we're looking for. So here's what I'd like you to do. You've got some reflection questions on your handout. And I want you to take some time to reflect on your own life for a moment. There's a couple of questions that have you reflect on yourself for just a bit. And then there's a couple that have you reflect on people in your group. These are important, especially if you're a leader. Okay? And especially if you're a leader who's saying, who are the people in my group who might be leaders? You might even be a leader who's asked people to lead and they've said no, or you did what I said we shouldn't do. You just said, somebody want to lead next time, and got blank stares and freaked out looks. This is what I want you to do. Let's hit reset. Just think about the people in your group. Where have you seen these ingredients at play in their life? So I'm going to give you, how much time do I have for this whole session? Oh yeah, I got the rest of the time. Sweet. I'm going to give you 5 minutes just to work on this around your tables, okay? I might even give you more, but let's say 5 to start. John Hagelin wants 6. We're going to do 5. We'll do 5 right now, John, and then maybe I'll see your 6 and raise you 7. But go to those questions. Take a little bit of time to process it. And honestly, if you're here with a co-leader of your group and you're starting to think about people in your group, you may want to actually talk that out, so you've got some space to talk. But go back to your tables. You have 6 minutes, John. See your 6, all right? That's the whole thing, is who is maybe in our community already preparing to step into leadership, or is God preparing to step into leadership? That's how we identify the who. We're looking for fast people. Faithful, available, spirit-led, teachable. That's what you want in potential leaders, all right? The question then becomes, though, okay, if I were simply to say, you're a leader now, it would be kind of like Matthew's gospel. Here's the 12, go get them. And, being like, how did they possibly do that? It's good news, Jesus didn't do that to his disciples. He developed them. It's not just enough to know the who, you need to know the how. What is the journey that someone goes on in order to grow into leadership? And there's a wonderful tool that was developed by a guy by the name of Mike Breen. He wrote a fantastic book called Building a Discipling Culture. If you've never read Building a Discipling Culture, I would highly recommend picking up. It's a very practical book. But Mike Breen, something you need to know about him is he grew up dyslexic. He had a hard time reading. So he says people would give me stuff to read and I just couldn't even get through it. So what he did is he developed shapes to actually help him think through key ideas in discipleship and what it means to grow in his walk with Jesus. And so he actually had a shape for thinking about how disciples are formed into leaders. And that shape, very simple, it's a square. And so you've got actually a part of your handout that looks a little something like this. So I want you to follow me around the square, okay? Because Mike does a great job talking about the journey that leaders are on, how do we develop them, and he just kind of uses this shape to paint a picture of it. So let's go ahead and walk around the square for just a minute. He says he uses the letters D1 and L1. So D is for disciple, L is for leader. So he says in the first stage of a disciple's journey into leadership, they are what he calls unconsciously incompetent. What it means is they don't know what they don't know. And what they need from a leader is directive leadership, where the leader says, I'm just going to do and you're just going to watch, and then we're going to talk about it. All right? And this is the disciples, by the way, when Jesus first calls them, right? He says, hey, I want you to leave your nets and follow me. And they're all excited. They're like, woo! But they have no idea what they just said yes to. And so they're following around, they're unconscious. They don't know what they don't know, right? They're just kind of following Jesus. And it's a whole lot of just Jesus doing stuff. And they're just watching, and then they talk about it. Beautiful example, Jesus is out on the boat. he gets up and he preaches about a farmer going out to sow his seed, and he casts seed, and some of it grows, some of it gets eaten, some of it gets burned, it's just all that stuff. And then afterwards, the disciples come up to him and they say, what was that all about? And he says, aha, I'm going to tell you. And then he explains what the parable meant. Right? Jesus is doing, they're watching, they talk about it. So in the early stages, what somebody needs from you is they need an opportunity in which they can see what you do, watch you do it, and then talk about it. All right? That's the first step. But then you quickly want to move them into a place where they're actually helping you. And this is what is important. This is how you kind of turn the corner to the next side, is you actually have to introduce the possibility of failure by giving them a little bit of responsibility. Not a lot of responsibility, but a little bit of responsibility. Okay? You introduce the possibility of failure. And in this stage, the disciple now becomes consciously competent. Now they know what they don't know, and it's totally freaking them out, okay? And what they need from you as a leader is coaching leadership and saying, I'm still doing it, but you're going to help. Really good example is the feeding of the 5,000, right? Jesus preaching, the disciples are like, oh, it's awesome, he's preaching again, he's so good. And then they go, they're like, hey, it's getting late, these people need to be fed. And Jesus goes, yeah, why don't you feed them? And they're like, what? What do you mean we feed them? We don't have enough money? And he's just like, well, what do you have? We have like a lunchbox. And Jesus says, bring it to me. He multiplies it, and he says, now you feed them. And then they go out and they feed them. Jesus is still doing it, but now they're helping. So what they need from you as a leader is they need an opportunity where you've given them a little bit of responsibility. They're not doing everything, but you're starting to say, I want you to help me. So maybe next time, when we're doing small group, why don't you help me just do the opening icebreaker question? We'll talk a little bit about why that's so important, and then you do it. You lead that part of the discussion. Or I'll tell you what, we need to serve together. Why don't you pick one of the serving opportunities on the community impact card, and you put it together and organize it, and then we'll come and we'll do it with you. And I can help you get the message out to the group and stuff like that, but why don't you help me? And what you start to do is you start to give them bigger and bigger kinds of responsibility. You're not totally letting them go yet. You're still doing a lot of it, but they're starting to help. Because what happens is as you start to kind of ramp up a little bit of the responsibility is eventually they will land in what we call the pit of despair. And actually, this is a great place for them to be. And here's why. People will tell you over and over and over again that it's actually through failure that we learn best. And what we want to do is we actually want people to fail in a safe environment where you're still there to help them so that they can learn and grow. And this is actually key for them growing in their leadership. What they need from you when they're in that pit is they need you to not rescue them from it. They need you to get down in the pit with them and help build a ladder out, a ladder of time, presence, grace, and vision. You're building a ladder of time, grace, presence, and vision. You're getting in, you're just saying, hey, it's okay. I'm here with you. We're not rushing this. I know you messed up or didn't follow through or didn't quite go the way we thought. That's okay. What did you learn? And then it's casting the vision. Hey, this is why we're doing it. I know you're a little discouraged. It's okay. We'll try again. But here's why this is so important. And you're casting vision. And that's actually critical for helping them get around that corner and to continue to grow as you build that ladder of time, presence, grace, and vision. Because if you can do that, now the disciple is starting to become consciously competent. They know what they know. They still have to think about it. It's kind of like when they're driving a car, and what they need from you is, by the way, they need from you is supporting leadership. You do now, and I'm going to help you. This is where actually they're doing the lion's share of the stuff, and you're supporting them. And when I say consciously competent, it's kind of like when you first learn to drive a car. You've passed your driver's test, you've got your driver's license, but you're still thinking about everything, right? You're thinking about the dials, you're looking at all the mirrors, you're still kind of stressed out a little bit, and you're a little quick on the brake, and all that stuff. You're super aware, but you're driving, and it's awesome. And we kind of see this with the disciples, right? Jesus says, I taught you how to do it. Now you guys are going to go out and do it, and then you're going to meet up with me, and we're going to talk about it some more. And so they go out 2 by 2, and they come back, and they're super geeked. And they're like, well, it was awesome. We cast out demons, and people got healed, and we preached about the kingdom. And then they have the mountaintop experience, and Jesus comes down the mountain, and they're just like, there's a demon we can't cast out. They're not there yet, but they're doing a lot of it. And Jesus is still there helping them. So this is an area where you're starting to give them the lion's share of the stuff. You've been letting them help you lead small group gatherings. You've been letting them help you lead like serving opportunities. You maybe even given them the responsibility of meeting up one-on-one with a member of the group to check in with them and pray. But now you're saying, hey, next time we get together, you're leading the whole thing. But I'll tell you what, I'll help prep it with you. Make sure you're on target. And we'll get together, we'll debrief. And I'll be there. So if you get stuck, I'll still help out. All right? And one of the things that's key for knowing if your disciple is actually moved from D2 to D3 is asking the question, who owns the vision? If you still own the vision, they have not stepped into D3 yet. If you're still the one articulating, hey, this is why we do small group, this is why studying the Bible is important, this is what we hope to see in our people, they're still in D2. But when they start articulating the vision, this is why I love our small group. This is where people get transformed and learn to look, live, and love more like Jesus. And this is why serving is so important, and I love it. And they're just really excited about it. Now they've moved to D3 because now they're owning the vision. They're excited about it. They want to help lead it. And by the way, this is really critical for those kind of pit moments, because sometimes there are people who get into the pit, and no matter how much time, presence, grace, and vision you give them, they never want to get out. They just keep being like, oh, this is terrible, I don't like it, blah, blah, blah. The problem is probably vision. They probably don't agree with the vision, and they don't want to go any further. So vision is important. But once they start articulating the vision and getting excited about the vision, and they start leading the vision, you know you've got somebody in D3. Consciously competent. They know what they know. They're doing, you're helping. And what they need at this point to kind of get around kind of third corner here is you have to just ask the question, are they doing it naturally, and then delegate? Do you start to see them prepping naturally where they're just kind of like, hey, I think I got this, and they just start prepping, and they're ready to lead, and it just kind of starts to flow out of them, that they just start putting things together quickly. Then you know that they're probably ready to move to the next stage. The next stage this is a fun stage. This is where they become unconsciously competent. Unconsciously competent. They do it intuitively and with passion. And all they need from you is encouraging leadership, where it's like, you do and I cheer. We talk about it. They're doing it all. And you're just like, woo! You're just cheering them on. And it's exciting. When I say unconsciously incompetent, it's because now it's happening so naturally that if you ask them, hey, how did you do that? They're kind of like, I don't know. I just doing it. Just doing it naturally. This is a great stage for them to be in, but they're not done yet. Because eventually you want them to move from a D4 to an L1. And this is kind of the final corner here. It's where you help them to identify who to disciple next. And now they're doing it with other people. And by the way, they still need you. But they don't need you with them in the trenches. Now they need you kind of backing them up and helping them to remember how to take someone around the square. So your development never really stops. You're always kind of a D1 and an L1 at the same time in something. Okay, but you want to help them say, okay, so who are you now going to raise up? And then you help them raise them up. Now here's something that's really interesting about this. You don't spend the same amount of time in each phase. I know it's a square, so they're all equal sides. But really, if you start to think about the level of time and energy and investment that this takes, the shape actually looks a little something like this. It's more like a kite, where D1 and D4 are the shortest amount of time. You want to invite them in where they're watching you and you're doing stuff and they're watching you and you're talking about, but very quickly you want to move into giving them some responsibility. And this takes the most amount of time. The D2 and the D3 sides take the most amount of time and investment. What I love about this, by the way, is the pit is at the bottom. It's like the lowest point. But that's the kind of time it takes. And you don't want to just be cheering them on forever and ever and ever. You want to very quickly start to say, you are doing it. You're awesome at this. I know that you've really grown a ton. Who are you going to disciple next? So that energy and that excitement, that momentum becomes something that just is contagious. And what actually I love about like turning it on its side and giving it the shape, you want to know what's at the center of the shape? It's a cross. The only way we do this as we lead people is with a whole lot of prayer and dependence on Jesus, both for them and for us as leaders. Praying people through it, helping them walk around it. But you have to have a clear target of what you're asking them to do. That's critical. What kind of a leader do you want them to be? If you want them to help you take over leading your small group, then they need to have time with you learning how you do it. You need to give them that investment. Do you have a clear picture of what you're asking them? That's why we spend so much time in these trainings, like going over this again and saying, here's the why. This is why we do what we do. We want them to become leaders of healthy groups. Groups that are scripture-centered, spirit-led, joy-filled, transformation-focused, and mission-driven. And if you want them to become a good leader, they need time with you to learn how to do this. So, it's reflection time. I want you to just take a few moments, think about what you just kind of saw, rehearsed again, and there's some questions, again, in your handout, asking you to reflect. So if you're like, I'm not a leader right now, this is a great time to just say, well, where are you at in your journey in growth? Where are you at on one of these sides? What is it that you still need to learn? If you are a leader, it's starting to ask the question, if I've got people that I'm developing right now, where are they and what do they need from me? Or if I'm going to invite someone into this process, who is that person and where could we start? All right? And so I want you to take a few moments. You're just going to start to think about, I would like you just grab a couple of those questions there, spend a little time maybe talking, reflecting. That'll kind of bring us back together. And then we'll wrap up for tonight by giving you a preview of tomorrow. All right, but take a few moments now to reflect on a couple of the questions you found there.